My name is Camila. 3 hours after giving my half-brother part of my liver, my father dropped a cardboard box labeled "Donate" beside my bed. "You have done your part," Gregory snarled. "Do not come back." Kinsley filmed us smirking. Nearby, my brother wore an $18,000 Rolex, bought with donations raised while I bled. "I gave him my liver," I whispered. Gregory laughed. "That is all you were good for." Dr. Vidor suddenly entered. "Gregory, we must discuss this forged signature. If your blood is boiling, comment where and what time you are listening." The first thing I noticed when I woke up was the relentless rhythm of the Seattle rain hitting the hospital window. The sky outside Harborview Medical Center was a bruised, heavy gray. It matched the thick, numbing haze of the anesthesia still lingering in my blood. I did not move. I simply stared at the acoustic tiles on the ceiling. There were exactly 42 tiny holes in the panel directly above me. I counted them twice just to anchor my mind to something real. My right side burned with a deep, methodical ache. A portion of my liver was gone. It was currently 1 floor above me, stitched inside my 16-year-old half-brother, Macario. I felt hollowed out, but the physical emptiness was nothing compared to the absolute silence of the room. There were no balloons. There were no flowers. There was no one sitting in the uncomfortable vinyl guest chair waiting for me to open my eyes. Instead, resting against the peeling baseboard was the cardboard box. Gregory had used a thick black marker to write the word "donate" across the side. Through the half-open flaps, I could see my favorite wool sweater, a stack of my college textbooks, and the framed photograph of my late mother. He had not just packed my belongings. He had completely erased my footprint from their sprawling Bellevue estate. He brought my entire existence into a surgical recovery ward and left it on the floor like yesterday's trash. I did not cry. Crying was a currency I stopped spending on Gregory a decade ago. The heavy wooden door pushed open, cutting through the hum of the vital monitors. It was not my father. It was a woman in dark blue scrubs. Her name badge read Gloria Head Nurse. She had kind, tired eyes that had clearly seen every possible variation of family dysfunction. She checked my IV lines with practiced efficiency, her gaze briefly flicking to the cardboard box on the floor. She did not ask questions. She did not offer hollow pity. "How is our pain level today, Camila?" she asked softly. "Manageable," I replied. My voice was a dry, broken rasp. Gloria nodded, pulling a heated blanket from a rolling cart and draping it carefully over my chest. The warmth was the only gentle touch I had felt in days. She picked up my medical chart at the end of the bed. I watched her pull a bright yellow sticky note from her pocket. She scribbled a few words, peeled it off, and slapped it right on the front cover of my file. "Patient has 0 family support. Do not discharge without secondary caregiver." She offered a tight, sympathetic smile before stepping back into the hallway. I was completely alone. I closed my eyes and let the morphine pump click in the background. They had taken what they needed, and they had walked away. The transaction was over. To understand the absolute audacity of the cardboard box, you have to understand the illusion Kinsley built in Bellevue. My stepmother did not just have a family. She had a digital empire. Her YouTube channel boasted over 3 million subscribers. She sold a highly curated, deeply filtered fantasy of the perfect blended household. Every morning routine was monetized. Every family dinner was sponsored. Their house was a sprawling mansion bathed in the artificial glow of ring lights. Everything was beige, white, and perfectly sterile. But behind the camera, the reality was utterly suffocating. Macario was the primary prop. At 16, he was naturally introverted and increasingly frail as his liver condition worsened. But Kinsley did not let him rest. She dressed him in oversized aesthetic loungewear and forced him to sit through endless recording sessions. She fed him foul-tasting green powders on camera, prompting him to smile and tell the audience how much better he felt. She squeezed every drop of sympathy from her viewership, turning his failing health into ad revenue. I was the ghost in that house. I was the daughter from Gregory's first marriage, the girl who did not fit Kinsley's pristine blonde aesthetic. I was never featured in the thumbnails. I was never mentioned in the vlogs. I was completely invisible right up until the moment Macario's doctors announced he needed a living donor, and I was the only genetic match. They did not know who they were dealing with. They assumed my silence was weakness. They did not understand my actual profession. I work as a senior data archivist for a massive tech firm in downtown Seattle. My entire life revolves around preserving information. I deal with metadata source codes, server logs, and audit trails. I build systems that ensure nothing is ever truly deleted. Kinsley thought my job was boring. She lived in a world of fleeting stories and editable captions. She believed that reality was whatever she decided to post on the internet on any given Tuesday. She had no concept of permanent records. While she spent her days fabricating emotions for strangers, I spent mine organizing irrefutable facts. I knew how to track a deleted email across 3 servers. I knew how to pull the creation timestamp off a supposedly live video. I understood the digital architecture of the modern world. Gregory and Kinsley thought they could extract an organ from my body, throw me away in a cardboard box, and simply spin a new narrative for their viewers. They thought they controlled the narrative because they held the camera. They fundamentally misunderstood the rules of the game they were playing. Words can be manipulated, tears can be faked, but data is cold, hard, and entirely devoid of mercy. I looked at the box on the floor again. I did not feel fear. I felt a profound, chilling clarity. They had built a kingdom on a foundation of digital lies. I was going to tear it down. 48 hours after the surgery, the door to my hospital room swung open. Sarah walked in. She was my best friend, a senior cybersecurity analyst who shared my exact disdain for performative nonsense. She did not bring a bouquet of cheap hospital gift shop flowers. She did not bring a stuffed bear. She walked straight to the side of my bed, her face a mask of absolute fury, and handed me her tablet. "You need to see this right now," she said. Her voice was dangerously quiet. I took the tablet. It was loaded onto Kinsley's YouTube channel. A new video had just been published 2 hours ago. The thumbnail featured Kinsley in perfectly applied makeup, tears glistening in her eyes, clutching Macario's hand. The title was written in bold, desperate letters, "The Miracle That Saved My Son's Life." I pressed play. Kinsley sat in the center of the frame, speaking directly to her millions of followers. She wept beautifully. She talked about how terrifying the last few weeks had been. She talked about Macario fading away. And then she held up a sleek, matte black bottle with a minimalist green label. "We found a holistic path," Kinsley whispered to the camera. "We refuse to give up. This cellular regeneration blend formulated by my new wellness company turned his blood work around in a matter of days. My boy is healing. The supplements saved his life." I stared at the screen. The rhythmic clicking of my morphine pump suddenly sounded very loud. There was not a single mention of the operating room. There was not a single mention of the surgical teams at Harborview. And there was absolutely no mention of the fact that the only reason Macario was breathing was because my liver was currently filtering the toxins from his blood. Kinsley had completely erased my sacrifice. Instead, she was using my brother's surgical recovery to launch a fraudulent line of dietary supplements. She had inserted a direct purchase link in the video description. A ticker at the bottom of the screen showed a limited-time discount code. I handed the tablet back to Sarah. I felt a cold knot forming in the pit of my stomach. "Check the sales metrics on the back end of her site," I said, my voice entirely flat. "How much has she moved?" Sarah tapped the screen, pulling up a secondary tracking dashboard she had already prepared. The numbers populated instantly. In less than 48 hours, desperate parents and gullible fans had flooded the site. They were buying snake oil, hoping for a miracle for their own sick children. $650,000, Sarah said. "And the GoFundMe she launched last month, the one claiming to be for his medical bills. It is completely drained. My insurance had covered 95% of my surgical costs. There were no massive medical bills for Gregory and Kinsley to pay. They had monetized my organ, exploited a child, and turned a life-saving procedure into $1 million fraud. I did not flinch. The grift was documented. Whenever someone hears the details of this story, they inevitably ask the exact same question. If Gregory and Kinsley were so blatantly toxic, why did you agree to get on the operating table in the first place? Why give a piece of your body to people who treated you like a shadow? The answer is rarely comfortable. It is rooted in a psychological trap known as learned helplessness. It is the invisible, suffocating chain worn by every survivor of a narcissistic household. If you are raised by people who withhold affection like a scarce resource, you do not simply learn to live without it. You learn to perform for it. You spend your entire life trying to figure out the exact sequence of actions that will finally make you worthy of being loved. I spent a decade watching Kinsley shower Macario with performative adoration while I was sent to my room. I spent 10 Christmases buying thoughtful gifts for Gregory, only to receive a generic gift card in return. I was conditioned to believe that my mere existence was a burden and that I had to constantly earn my right to stand in their house. Then 6 weeks ago, the dynamic suddenly shifted. Gregory called me. He did not text an assistant to relay a message. He called my personal number and asked me to meet him at a quiet coffee shop near the waterfront. When I arrived, he looked terrible. The arrogant posture was gone. His eyes were red and lined with genuine panic. He reached across the small cafe table and took my hands in his. He had not held my hand since I was 9 years old. "Camila," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Macario is running out of time. The registry is too long. We tested everyone. You are the only exact genetic match. You are the only hope this family has." It was the most intoxicating drug I had ever been offered. For 26 years, I was the outcast. I was the unwanted baggage from a previous life. But in that coffee shop, sitting across from a desperate man, I was the savior. I was suddenly essential. I believed that giving them my liver would permanently alter the foundation of our relationship. I convinced myself that an organ donation was the ultimate undeniable proof of my worth. I thought it would buy me a permanent seat at their dinner table. I thought it would finally make me a daughter. I was wrong. You cannot buy genuine affection from people who view relationships strictly as business transactions. They saw my desperation for love and recognized it as a vulnerability to be exploited. They did not see a daughter offering her life. They saw a free, compatible medical component that would keep their primary revenue stream alive. Lying in the hospital bed, feeling the dull throb of my incision, the final illusion shattered. The transaction had failed. I was no longer a daughter seeking approval. I was an archivist collecting data. Sarah drove me to a quiet rental apartment across the city, far away from the sterile lights of the hospital. It had been 5 days since the surgery. My body moved with a fragile, deliberate slowness. Every step was a sharp reminder of the missing tissue. The apartment was completely silent, a stark contrast to the loud, performative energy that always suffocated Kinsley's house. I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed and pulled the cardboard box toward me. The word "donate," written in Gregory's aggressive handwriting, stared back at me. I reached inside. The top layer was a chaotic mess of my basic clothing shoved in with careless haste. Below that were a few random books from my university days. But at the very bottom, carefully wrapped in an old scarf, was a small wooden jewelry box. It had belonged to my biological mother. My mother died when I was 12. She was a quiet woman who preferred the smell of salt water and cedar over the expensive perfumes Kinsley bathed in. She left me a small weathered cabin on the coast of Monterey, California. It was the only place I ever truly felt safe. After her passing, Gregory locked the deed away and rarely permitted me to speak her name. He claimed he was managing the property until I was mature enough to handle it. I opened the wooden box. It was mostly empty, save for a few tarnished silver rings. I ran my fingers along the velvet lining, feeling for the familiar slight depression in the bottom left corner. I pressed down and the false bottom popped loose. Hidden beneath the velvet was a heavy brass key. It was cold to the touch. A faded manila tag was tied to the loop with a piece of twine. Written on the tag in my mother's elegant script were 3 words: Walter and Associates. I traced the letters with my thumb. Walter was the family attorney my mother used before Gregory married Kinsley and systematically replaced every person in our lives with his own contacts. I had not heard that name in over a decade. Gregory had told me years ago that Walter had retired and all my mother's legal files were lost in a firm transition. Gregory had lied. He had deliberately hidden the truth about this attorney. He had packed this box in a frantic rush, entirely unaware that he was handing me a loaded weapon. I turned the brass key over in the dim light of the bedroom. The pieces of a 10-year-old puzzle were finally beginning to surface. What was Gregory so desperate to hide in that legal office? I squeezed the key tightly. I intended to find out. I continued to sort through the cardboard box. The physical exertion was exhausting, but my mind was operating with absolute mechanical precision. Near the bottom corner of the box, crumpled beneath a heavy winter coat, was a dark blue denim jacket. I had not worn it in years. I picked it up to fold it, and my fingers brushed against something stiff in the right pocket. I pulled it out. It was a folded piece of lined notebook paper. It was severely wrinkled as if it had been clutched in a sweaty fist before being hastily stuffed away. I smoothed it out on the mattress. The handwriting was jagged and uneven. It belonged to my 16-year-old brother. I am sorry, the note read. Mom made me lie to the camera. I did not want to take your liver. Please do not hate me. I stared at the ink. The heavy, suffocating anger I felt toward Kinsley suddenly shifted into something much sharper. Macario was not a willing participant in their fraudulent empire. He was a hostage. I pictured him in that massive, brightly lit house in Bellevue. I pictured Kinsley applying powder to his pale face, adjusting the lighting to make him look just sick enough to garner sympathy, but not sick enough to ruin the aesthetic. I thought about the bitter green supplements she forced him to swallow on camera, claiming they were the source of his healing. He knew the truth. He knew my organ was keeping him alive, but he was trapped in an environment where obedience was the only way to survive. He had snuck into my room while Gregory was aggressively packing my life into a box. He had hidden this note, hoping I would eventually find it. It was a desperate, silent plea for forgiveness from a boy who had zero control over his own existence. Kinsley and Gregory did not just exploit me. They were actively destroying a child's grip on reality for views and sponsorship deals. They were making him complicit in a massive financial lie. I folded the note carefully and placed it on the nightstand. I felt a profound sense of calm wash over me. Before finding this paper, my motivation was purely about my own vindication. I wanted to expose the people who had treated me like disposable medical waste. But looking at Macario's jagged handwriting, the mission evolved. This was no longer just about payback. This was an extraction mission. Kinsley had turned her son into a prop. She had turned me into a spare part. She picked the wrong family members. He was an innocent victim. The betrayal did not just happen in the recovery room. It began precisely 3 hours before the anesthesia pulled me under. Sitting in the quiet of the rental apartment, I opened my phone and scrolled back through my message history with Gregory. The hospital billing department required a 5% out-of-pocket copay before the surgery could proceed. For a procedure of this magnitude, that 5% equated to roughly $6,800. I was a young archivist. I lived comfortably, but I did not have that kind of liquid cash sitting in a checking account. Gregory, who lived in a multi-million-dollar estate, had promised to cover it. I looked at the timestamps on the digital screen. At exactly 5:30 in the morning, while sitting in the pre-operation bay with an intravenous line in my arm, I had texted him. "The billing office needs the card number, Dad. Are you here yet?" The small gray text beneath my message indicated it was read at 5:32. There was no reply. At 5:45, I sent another message. "Dad, they are going to delay the procedure. Please call the front desk. Read at 5:46. Silence. At 6 in the morning, a nurse had informed me the surgery would be postponed unless the balance was cleared. In a state of pure panic, fearing my brother's health would fail, I logged into my banking application. I emptied my emergency savings account. I transferred every single dollar I had to cover the cost of removing my own liver to save his son. At 6:15, I sent one final message. "I paid it. I am going in now." Read at 6:17. He never intended to pay a single cent. He had driven Kinsley to the mall to purchase an $18,000 Rolex watch for Macario's survivor gift while I was draining my bank account to keep the boy alive. He watched my desperate messages arrive, read them, and simply put his phone back in his pocket. The transaction was completely one-sided. I provided the organ and the funding. He provided the cardboard box. I took a screenshot of the text thread, capturing the exact timestamps and the read receipts. I uploaded the image to the encrypted cloud folder Sarah had created for me. Every piece of data was a brick. I was slowly gathering the materials required to build their prison. I closed the messaging application. I did not shed a tear over the money. The money was merely evidence. I stopped waiting for a father. The following morning, Sarah transformed the small kitchen table of the rental into a digital command center. She set up her dual monitors, her mechanical keyboard clicking rapidly as she navigated through layers of public records. She was a master at following digital breadcrumbs. "We need to track the GoFundMe capital," I said, handing her a cup of black coffee. Sarah nodded, her eyes locked on the glowing screens. Kinsley launched the campaign 3 months ago. She marketed it as an emergency medical fund to save Macario. Over 32,000 people donated. She pulled up the archived campaign page. The final total displayed on the screen was exactly $650,000. My insurance provider covered 95% of the surgical costs. I personally paid the remaining 5% out of my own savings. Harborview Medical Center never issued a massive crippling bill to Gregory or Kinsley. The entire premise of the crowdfunding campaign was a complete fabrication. So, where did the money go, I asked, my tone methodical. Sarah's fingers flew across the keys. She pulled the transaction ledgers and cross-referenced the routing numbers with state business registries. The platform requires the funds to be deposited into a verified bank account. I am tracking the destination routing number now. A document appeared on the right monitor. It was a business registration form filed in the state of Delaware. The funds did not go to a medical provider, Sarah said, tapping the screen. They were routed directly into a newly formed limited liability company. Bellevue Wellness LLC. I recognized the name immediately. It was the exact company Kinsley had credited in her latest video. The company producing the holistic supplement she claimed saved my brother's life. The scope of the fraud was breathtaking. Kinsley had used her dying son to solicit $650,000 from sympathetic strangers. She then used that exact money to manufacture a line of useless green powders. Finally, she used my secretly donated liver to cure the boy, attributing the medical miracle to her new product to drive even more sales. It was a perfectly closed loop of exploitation. She was monetizing the sickness, the cure, and the aftermath. I told you, Sarah murmured, leaning back in her chair. Narcissists always leave a paper trail. They are too arrogant to cover their tracks properly. I looked at the corporate registration document. Kinsley's signature was clearly visible at the bottom. They stole it all. The brass key from the cardboard box sat on the kitchen counter, heavy with implication. If Gregory was willing to exploit a public crowdfunding platform, there was absolutely no limit to what he might do with private assets. Sarah, I said quietly, search the county real estate database. Look up the property in Monterey, the cabin my mother left me. Sarah switched tabs and accessed the California Property Registry. She typed in the address. A few seconds later, a highly polished real estate listing populated the screen. The cabin had been freshly painted. The coastal brush had been manicured. It is listed as an active property, Sarah said, her voice dropping. The asking price is $950,000. It has a pending offer. I stared at the screen. The property legally belonged to me. Gregory had always insisted he was holding the deed in a standard family trust until I turned 30. You cannot sell a house you do not own. Pull the legal transfer documents, I instructed. Sarah bypassed the commercial listing site and accessed the raw county clerk files. She brought up a digital copy of an authorization form filed just 3 weeks ago. It was a document granting Gregory full power of attorney to liquidate the Monterey asset. At the bottom of the page was an electronic signature. It was my name. They forged it, Sarah whispered. They used a generic electronic signing platform to fake your authorization while you were busy undergoing endless pre-operation medical screenings. The picture was now completely clear. The $650,000 from the GoFundMe was merely the seed money for Kinsley's supplement business. The $950,000 from my mother's house was meant to fund their lavish Bellevue lifestyle once the medical sympathy dried up. They had calculated my exact worth down to the penny. They assumed I would be too weak, too discarded, and too intimidated to ever challenge a legally filed document. They thought an electronic signature was enough to erase my mother's legacy. They did not realize that electronic signatures come with metadata. They come with IP addresses and precise timestamps. I knew exactly how to prove that the document was signed from a device located in Bellevue while I was physically hooked to a cardiac monitor in Seattle. I reached across the counter and picked up the heavy brass key. Find the address for Walter & Associates, I told Sarah. I grabbed my coat. Walter & Associates operated out of a modest brick building in a quiet neighborhood north of Seattle. The reception area smelled of polished oak and decades of accumulated paperwork. I walked up to the front desk and asked for Walter. The receptionist looked at me, glanced at the heavy brass key in my hand, and immediately picked up her phone. 2 minutes later, an older gentleman with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses stepped into the lobby. He looked at my face, and a soft, knowing recognition settled into his expression. "You have your mother's eyes," Walter said quietly. "Come into my office, Camila." I sat in a leather chair across from his massive mahogany desk. I placed the brass key on the wooden surface. Walter did not ask any preliminary questions. He simply unlocked a lower drawer, retrieved a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax, and set it between us. He had been waiting for this exact moment for over a decade. "Gregory contacted me 3 weeks ago," Walter said, folding his hands. "He requested a copy of the original deed for the Monterey property. He informed me that he had acquired your electronic signature for a general power of attorney, granting him full authorization to liquidate the estate. I felt a cold knot tighten in my chest. He is attempting to sell it for $950,000, I replied. Walter offered a thin, razor-sharp smile. He can attempt whatever he wishes, but he will fail. He opened the manila envelope and pulled out a stack of dense legal documents. The paper was slightly yellowed at the edges. The heading at the very top was printed in bold, undeniable letters. It was an irrevocable trust. Before your mother passed away, she anticipated Gregory's financial greed, Walter explained methodically. She did not leave the Monterey property in a standard will. She placed it into this trust, naming you as the sole and absolute beneficiary. An irrevocable trust cannot be altered, amended, or bypassed by a standard power of attorney. It exists entirely outside of probate court. Gregory's electronic document is completely worthless. I stared at my mother's signature at the bottom of the page. She had known. Even in her final days, she had possessed the clarity to see exactly who Gregory was. She had built a fortress around my only sanctuary, locking the gates long before Gregory ever thought to try the handle. If Gregory attempts to finalize this real estate transaction using a forged power of attorney, Walter continued, his tone turning clinical. He is committing intentional probate fraud. It is a severe financial crime. I took a deep breath. The dull ache in my side seemed to momentarily fade. I had walked into this office hoping for a delay tactic. I was walking out with absolute, undeniable legal leverage. Kinsley had the audience and Gregory had the audacity, but I had the permanent record. I placed the trust back into the envelope. I possessed the weapon. I returned to the rental apartment and handed the manila envelope to Sarah. She read through the legal jargon, her eyes widening with every paragraph. When she finished, she set the papers down and looked at me. The defensive perimeter was secure. Now it was time to build the offensive strike. Kinsley operated under the assumption that the internet was written in pencil. She believed that if she deleted a post, removed a comment, or took down a video, the evidence simply vanished into the digital ether. It is a very common delusion among people who build empires on social media platforms. They do not understand the fundamental architecture of the web. I am a senior archivist. I understand exactly how permanent the internet actually is. I sat down at the dual monitors. For the next 14 hours, I did not sleep. I deployed automated web scraping tools to pull the source code from Kinsley's entire channel history. I did not just save her videos. I extracted the EXIF data. This is the hidden metadata, embedded in digital files, that records the exact GPS coordinates, the camera model, and the precise timestamp to the second. I pulled the raw file of the vlog she posted the day of my surgery. In the video, she claimed she was sitting in a hospital waiting room praying for Macario. The metadata told a completely different story. The GPS coordinates matched the exact location of a high-end luxury shopping mall in downtown Seattle. The timestamp was identical to the receipt for the $18,000 Rolex. She had recorded her tearful prayer in a parked luxury SUV. Next, I targeted the GoFundMe campaign. When a campaign is closed, the front-facing page disappears, but the back-end financial ledgers are cached across multiple server archives. I utilized a digital Wayback Machine to pull the complete transaction history. I paired it with the Delaware State Business Registry filing for Bellevue Wellness LLC. The dates aligned perfectly. The crowdfunded capital was transferred out of the holding account on a Tuesday. The LLC was funded and registered on a Wednesday. The initial manufacturing order for her holistic supplements was placed on a Thursday. I organized everything into a strictly encrypted read-only digital vault. I categorized the documents the same way I would organize a corporate forensic audit. There was a folder for the financial fraud. There was a folder for the real estate forgery. There was a folder for the medical exploitation. Every claim was backed by 3 independent points of verifiable data. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the glowing screens. The digital trap was flawless. The archive was permanent. We needed a catalyst. Kinsley was currently sitting comfortably at the top of a fraudulent empire, counting the daily revenue from her green powders. If I simply uploaded a video exposing her, she would immediately deploy her massive audience to report my account, bury the algorithm, and dismiss me as a disgruntled, jealous relative. The attack could not originate from me. It had to come from a neutral, objective source. I opened a secure, encrypted email client. I searched for an independent investigative journalist named Elias. He worked for a mid-tier digital publication that specialized in exposing influencer scams and predatory marketing tactics. He had a modest following, but his reputation for meticulous fact-based reporting was flawless. I drafted a brief, highly anonymous message. The subject line read, "The Bellevue Wellness Miracle is a medical fraud." In the body of the email, I did not write a long emotional narrative. Journalists ignore emotion, they respond to evidence. I simply stated that the miraculous recovery of the Bellevue family vlogger's son was not the result of holistic cellular supplements. It was the direct result of a major organ transplant performed at Harborview Medical Center. I attached a single PDF file. It was a heavily redacted surgical summary. I blacked out my name, my personal information, and the names of the surgical staff. I left only 3 details visible: the date of the procedure, the exact nature of the liver transplant, and the patient receiving the organ. I clicked send. For 3 days, the internet remained completely silent. I watered the small cactus I had planted in my hospital cup. I reviewed the digital vault. I waited. On the 4th morning at exactly 9 in the morning, the notification alert on Sarah's tablet chimed. She picked it up, her eyes scanning the screen rapidly. She turned the tablet toward me. Elias had published the article. The headline was written in stark, aggressive typography: "Bellevue Wellness, a miracle cure or a medical cover-up." The article was a masterpiece of objective journalism. Elias did not make any definitive accusations of financial fraud, but he presented the redacted medical document side by side with Kinsley's timeline. He asked a very simple, devastating question: why would a mother sell a cure if the actual remedy was a scalpel? Within 2 hours, the article had been shared 12,000 times across multiple social media platforms. The comment sections under Kinsley's recent videos began to shift. The blind adoration was slowly being replaced by thousands of questioning voices. People who had spent their savings on her supplements were demanding answers. The glass was cracking. The fallout inside the Bellevue mansion was immediate. You can always measure the precise level of a narcissist's panic by the frequency of their text messages. My phone, which had remained entirely silent for weeks following my surgery, suddenly began to vibrate with desperate intensity. The first message arrived at noon. "Honey, we miss you so much. Please call me. Your father is worried." I stared at the screen. I did not type a response. I let the read receipt register. I wanted her to know that I was watching her scramble. 2 hours later, the tone shifted from sickly sweet to urgent manipulation. A hit piece is circulating online. Some crazy reporter is spreading lies about Macario's health. We need you to issue a quick public statement. Just say you chose to be an anonymous donor and that the supplements aided his recovery. We will pay you $10,000 for your time. She was trying to buy a digital alibi. I let the message sit on read. By 6 in the evening, the panic had morphed into pure, unadulterated rage. The financial reality of the situation was finally setting in. Sponsors were likely calling. Customers were demanding refunds. Kinsley's perfectly curated reality was collapsing, and she needed a scapegoat. "You ungrateful, selfish brat," the next text read. "Answer your phone right now. You are tearing this family apart. If you do not post a video defending us tonight, Gregory will cut you off completely. We will make sure you get nothing from the estate." I smiled a cold, humorless smile. Gregory could not cut me off from an estate he did not legally control. He could not sell a house locked inside an irrevocable trust. They had absolutely zero leverage left, but they were too blinded by their own arrogance to realize they were already standing on a trap door. I took screenshots of every single message. I captured the desperate bribes and the vicious threats. I added the images to the digital vault. Kinsley was rapidly providing the exact evidence I needed to prove her state of mind. She was documenting her own guilt in real time. At 8 in the evening, the texting abruptly stopped. The silence was not a surrender. It was a pivot. Kinsley realized she could not control me in the shadows, so she decided to control the narrative in the light. They were losing control. At 9 in the evening, Sarah's monitor flashed with an urgent notification. Kinsley was going live across all her major platforms. I pulled a chair to the screen. The broadcast began. The visual aesthetics were deeply calculated. There was no expensive ring light. There was no flawless makeup. Kinsley was sitting on the hardwood floor of her kitchen, wearing an oversized gray sweater. She looked exhausted, broken, and utterly devastated. It was a masterclass in performative vulnerability. More than 100,000 viewers tuned in within the first 10 minutes. Kinsley looked directly into the lens and let a single tear trace down her cheek. "I have always promised to be transparent with you," she whispered, her voice trembling perfectly. "The article you read today is partially true. My son did receive a liver transplant." The chat section exploded with confusion. "I wanted to tell you," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I wanted to celebrate the miracle, but we were being blackmailed." I leaned closer to the monitor. The secondary twist was unfolding. "The donor was my stepdaughter, Camila Kinsley," continued, her voice hardening with manufactured grief. "We love her. We begged her to be part of our family. But she is deeply toxic. She used her liver as leverage. She demanded $650,000 from our emergency fund. She forced us to hide the surgery, threatening to destroy our family if we spoke the truth. We were terrified. We just wanted to save our boy." She did not stop there. She claimed my jealousy had driven me to fabricate the medical records. She claimed the supplements were real, but my extortion had drained their resources. She inverted the entire dynamic. She cast herself as the terrified, protective mother and painted me as a manipulative, greedy monster who monetized my own flesh. The viewership skyrocketed to 2 million. The chat scrolled so fast it was a blur of absolute hatred. Tens of thousands of strangers were calling for my arrest. They were finding my personal social media accounts and flooding them with death threats. Kinsley had weaponized her audience, directing a digital mob to completely annihilate my reputation. If you have ever had your reality twisted by a narcissist, you know exactly how cold that room felt. Hit subscribe if you are ready for the truth. I sat in the quiet of the Airbnb watching the screen flash with digital fury. I did not lock my accounts. I let them rage. She chose the war. If you ever find yourself at the center of a fabricated public scandal, there is a specific type of panic that tries to take hold of your mind. It is the terrifying fear that a lie repeated loudly enough by someone with a massive digital platform will automatically become the truth. Kinsley banked her entire offensive strategy on this exact assumption. She believed that because she had 2 million people crying with her on a live broadcast, reality would simply bend to accommodate her narrative. But as a professional archivist, I navigate a completely different reality. I understand a fundamental, unyielding principle of the digital age. Humans can lie with absolute conviction, but metadata cannot. Metadata is the underlying infrastructure of the modern internet. It is the invisible, irrefutable footprint left behind by every single digital action. When Kinsley uploaded a video claiming she was in a hospital waiting room, she manipulated the visual frame perfectly. But the background data embedded in that file recorded the exact longitudinal and latitudinal coordinates of the luxury shopping mall where she actually stood. When Gregory transferred the GoFundMe capital, he did not just move numbers on a glowing screen. He triggered a permanent audit trail. An audit trail is a chronological sequence of digital records that provide undeniable documentary evidence of the activities that have affected a specific operation. It is a permanent financial ledger. It tracks the exact millisecond the funds left the charitable platform. It tracks the exact IP address of the device that authorized the transfer. It tracks the precise moment the money landed in the newly registered commercial account for Bellevue Wellness. Kinsley could sit on her kitchen floor and weep about extortion. She could accuse me of demanding $650,000, but extortion leaves a massive digital trail. If I had demanded that money, there would be a secure record of it moving into my possession. Instead, the audit trail proved the money moved directly into her own corporate bank account. The general public is easily swayed by emotional performances. We are wired to empathize with a weeping mother begging for her sick child. But the legal system, financial regulators, and digital forensics analysts do not care about tears. They only care about the process. Justice, in its purest form, is not a screaming match in the comments section. It is a meticulously documented process. I did not need to scream back at Kinsley's followers. I did not need to match her emotional hysteria or post a tearful defense. I only needed to compile the data. Every IP address, every timestamp, and every server log was a nail in the coffin she was actively building for herself. The truth was not a matter of subjective opinion. It was a matter of permanent record. I looked at Sarah, who was monitoring the ongoing vitriol on my social feeds. She asked if I wanted to deactivate my accounts to stop the intense harassment. I shook my head. Let them speak, I told her. The higher she climbs on this pedestal of lies, the harder the impact will be when the foundation gives out. I closed the terminal window. The record was complete. Before I could finalize the presentation of the gathered evidence, there was one remaining vulnerability in Kinsley's live stream narrative that needed to be neutralized. She had publicly claimed that I held the family hostage, forcing them to sign sweeping non-disclosure agreements and media releases under the explicit threat of withholding my liver. It was a brilliant lie because it utilized the very real medical privacy forms that accompany any major surgical procedure. I needed to prove exactly who was forcing whom to sign legal documents. I left the rental apartment and drove back through the gray Seattle drizzle to Harborview Medical Center. I did not go back to the surgical recovery ward. I went straight to the administrative wing and requested a meeting with Dr. Vidor. He was the attending surgeon who had overseen my procedure, the quiet man who had interrupted Gregory's cruel departure to question the signature on my chart. He met me in a sterile, brightly lit consultation room. He looked at me with the same steady, calculating gaze he had used in the hospital room days prior. "Camila," he said, gesturing to a heavy plastic chair. "How is the physical healing progressing?" "The physical healing is fine," I replied, sitting down across from him. "I am here about the administrative paperwork." Dr. Vidor nodded slowly. He unlocked a secure filing cabinet and pulled out a thick manila folder. "I watched the live broadcast last night," he said quietly. "I am bound by strict patient confidentiality regarding your brother's medical care. I cannot and will not discuss his specific treatment with anyone. However, your records and the documents surrounding your consent are entirely your property." He opened the folder and slid 2 pieces of paper across the smooth table. The first was the standard donor media release, an information-sharing authorization. It was dated several weeks before the surgery. The signature at the bottom was clearly my own. It designated Sarah as my sole emergency contact and explicitly denied the hospital permission to share my medical status with Kinsley's media company. The second document was dated the morning of the surgery, precisely when I was under heavy surgical anesthesia. It authorized Bellevue Wellness to use my image, my medical data, and my surgical outcome for commercial promotional purposes. The signature at the bottom was a sloppy, frantic digital scrawl. It was absolutely not mine. Dr. Vidor slid a third document forward. "This is the hospital's official notary log," he explained. "Every digital signature obtained in this facility is logged through an internal security system that records the employee who administered the tablet, the exact time, and the physical location of the device. This log proves that the second document was signed in the hospital lobby by a device registered to Gregory 3 full hours after you were heavily sedated." I traced the digital timestamp with my index finger. Gregory had forged my medical consent while I was unconscious on an operating table. "I flagged this discrepancy immediately," Dr. Vidor continued. "I revoked the second form instantly. That is why I interrupted your father before he left your room. I wanted you to have this on permanent record." I looked up at him. "Thank you," I whispered. He closed the heavy folder. "Take it with you." I returned to the quiet Airbnb with the final devastating piece of the puzzle secured safely in my bag. The atmosphere in the small apartment was heavy, charged with the kind of thick, static electricity that precedes a massive storm. Sarah had cleared the kitchen counter completely. In the center sat a high-capacity laser printer she had purchased that morning. We did not speak much. Words were entirely unnecessary at this point. We both knew exactly what the next phase of the operation required. I connected my laptop to the printer and opened the encrypted digital vault. I selected the files one by one with absolute precision. The printer began to hum, spitting out warm, crisp pages of irrefutable truth. I printed the metadata logs showing Kinsley's true location at the downtown luxury mall. I printed the financial audit trail from the GoFundMe platform directly to the Bellevue Wellness commercial account. I printed the irrevocable trust that permanently protected my mother's property in Monterey. Finally, I printed the hospital's notary log, explicitly showing Gregory's forged signature. I arranged the documents into neat, perfectly aligned stacks on the granite counter. It looked exactly like a professional forensic accounting display. While the printer continued its rhythmic work, I walked over to the small apartment windowsill. The cheap paper cup from Harborview Medical Center was still sitting exactly where I left it. Inside the cup, the tiny cactus I had planted weeks ago had finally taken root. A small, vibrant green offshoot was pushing its way aggressively through the dry, unforgiving soil. It had survived the sterile hospital room. It had survived the dark cardboard box. It was thriving in the exact container that was supposed to represent my complete disposability. I gently touched the small green spine. It was sharp and unyielding. Kinsley had spent the last 24 hours successfully inciting a massive digital mob. My phone was constantly vibrating with notifications from absolute strangers demanding my arrest. They firmly believed they were fighting for a victimized, heartbroken mother. They had no idea they were acting as unpaid foot soldiers for a sophisticated commercial grifter. I picked up the stack of freshly printed documents and tapped the edges against the counter to square them perfectly. I placed them inside a plain manila folder. I did not feel any anxiety. I did not feel any fear of the millions of people currently screaming my name on the internet. I felt a cold, absolute certainty. The sprawling house of cards Kinsley had built was structurally compromised. I just needed to pull the final foundational pillar. If you are waiting for the moment the house of cards collapses, drop a 100 in the comments right now. I looked at Sarah across the room. Turn on the camera. We set up the recording space in the small Spartan bedroom of the rental apartment. I did not want any visual distractions. There were no expensive ring lights reflecting in my eyes. There were no strategically placed plants or aesthetic background props. The wall behind me was a stark, flat white. I sat at a simple wooden desk wearing a plain black sweater. I did not apply makeup to artificially enhance my exhaustion. I did not need to perform a tragedy. There is no soft acoustic guitar track playing underneath my words to cue your tears. The truth does not require a heavily edited soundtrack. Sarah adjusted the lens of her professional camera, checked the audio levels, and pressed the red record button. I looked directly into the glass lens. I did not force a sad smile. I did not manufacture a single tear. I utilized the exact methodical tone I used when presenting complex data audits to corporate executives. "My name is Camila," I began. My voice was steady, instantly anchoring the quiet room. "I am 26 years old. I am the woman Kinsley has been weeping about for the last 48 hours. I am the daughter," she claims aggressively, "extorted her family for $650,000. I paused, letting the silence sit heavy for a fraction of a second. I am making this video to directly address the millions of people who watched her live stream yesterday. You were told a deeply compelling, heartbreaking story about a desperate mother fighting for her son's life against a toxic, greedy relative. It was a beautiful performance, but it was entirely fictional. I am not here to ask for your sympathy. I am not here to share my emotional trauma with strangers. I am here to share my screen. I reached out and brought the manila folder into the frame. I placed it deliberately on the wooden desk. Kinsley claimed I maliciously withheld my medical consent until I was paid from the GoFundMe charitable account. She claimed her new holistic supplements are directly responsible for her son's recovery. She claimed she is the innocent victim of a vicious extortion plot. I opened the folder. The crisp sound of paper shifting echoed clearly. When you build an empire on the internet, you eventually start believing your own lies. You forget that the internet is a machine. It does not feel empathy. It only records data. And data is permanently immune to manipulation. Today, we are going to review the actual data. We are going to look at timestamps, audit trails, and legal registries. We are going to dismantle the Bellevue wellness empire piece by piece, using their own digital footprints. I picked up the first document. Let us begin. I did not rush the presentation. I took my time with every single piece of paper, treating the camera lens like a silent jury. I started with the timeline of the I held up the redacted medical summary proving the exact date and time a portion of my liver was successfully transplanted into Macario. Then I held up the metadata log from Kinsley's tearful hospital waiting room vlog. This video was uploaded claiming she was actively praying in the surgical ward, I stated calmly. The EXIF data embedded in this specific file proves it was actually recorded in the parking garage of a downtown luxury shopping mall. I set that paper down and picked up the next one. It was a copy of a commercial receipt. While I was completely under anesthesia, Gregory and Kinsley purchased an $18,000 Rolex watch. The timestamp on this receipt is exactly 11 minutes after the surgeon made the first incision into my abdomen. I let that sickening fact hang in the air before moving to the financial core of her empire. I lifted the GoFundMe audit trail and the Delaware LLC business registry. Kinsley raised $650,000, claiming it was exclusively for medical debt. My insurance completely covered my procedure. Here is the routing number proving every single dollar from that charity platform was funneled directly into Bellevue Wellness. She did not pay a hospital. She funded a commercial supplement company using her son's failing liver as a marketing tool. She then credited her own retail product for the healing my organ provided. I placed the financial documents down. The stack of evidence was growing. Next, I addressed the extortion lie. I held up the hospital's official notary log, provided directly by Dr. Vidor. Kinsley claimed I forced them to sign documents under severe duress. This is the internal security log from Harborview Medical Center. It proves that 3 hours after my surgery, while I was completely unconscious, Gregory used his own personal device to forge my signature on a commercial media release form. I did not extort them. They committed medical forgery to ensure they could legally monetize my recovery. Finally, I picked up the raw video file Sarah had recovered from the cloud. I turned a small monitor toward the camera and pressed play. It was the unedited clip Kinsley had accidentally saved. You can hear the heavy thud of the cardboard box hitting the linoleum floor. You can see the word donate written in thick black marker. Gregory's harsh voice echoed sharply through the speakers. That is all you were good for. The clip ended. The silence in the room was absolute. I looked back into the lens. My face was a mask of cold stone. You built your brand on a lie, Kinsley. I brought the receipts. The truth is absolute. I did not stop recording. There was one final piece of documentation that required public viewing. It was not a bank statement. It was not a digital metadata file. It was a crumpled, slightly torn piece of lined notebook paper. I picked it up from the desk and held it close to the camera lens so the jagged, uneven handwriting was completely legible. This, I said, my voice dropping to a softer, more careful register, was hidden inside the cardboard box my father used to discard my belongings. It was written by my 16-year-old brother, Macario. I read the words aloud clearly and without rushing. I am sorry. Mom made me lie to the camera. I did not want to take your liver. Please do not hate me. I lowered the paper. The camera kept recording my steady gaze. Kinsley painted a portrait of a mother desperately fighting for her sick child. She claimed I was a toxic entity manipulating his health for financial gain. But the reality is far more insidious. Macario is not a willing participant in the Bellevue wellness empire. He is a minor being utilized as a commercial prop. He was forced to perform his illness and then forced to perform his recovery entirely for ad revenue and sponsor retention. I looked directly at the lens. Furthermore, administering untested, unregulated holistic green powders to a teenager who has just undergone a major organ transplant is not a miracle cure. It is a severe medical risk. Transplant patients require strict regimens of immunosuppressants to prevent organ rejection. Mixing unregulated commercial supplements into his system places his newly transplanted liver under unnecessary dangerous stress. Kinsley did not heal him. She jeopardized his fragile recovery to sell a product. I set the handwritten note down next to the hospital records. I did not extort this family. I did not demand a single dollar from the GoFundMe campaign. I emptied my own personal savings account to ensure the hospital would clear Macario for surgery. I gave him a portion of my liver because he is an innocent boy trapped in a highly monetized, deeply abusive production. I placed my hands flat on the desk. Kinsley, you have a massive audience. You have sponsors and millions of followers, but you do not have the truth. You only have a script. And your script has officially expired. I reached forward. I did not smile. I did not frown. I stopped the recording. I exported the video file. I did not add a single cut transition or background track. The raw, unedited file was exactly 22 minutes long. I logged into every social media platform I possessed. I titled the video, The Audit Trail of Bellevue Wellness. I pressed upload. Sarah sat across the room watching the progress bar slowly fill with a solid blue line. It reached 100%. The video was live. Now what? Sarah asked quietly. Now, I replied, closing my laptop. We let the data work. I walked away from the screen. The internet took over. The digital ecosystem moves with a terrifying, unpredictable velocity. When you introduce a highly documented, irrefutable set of facts into a massive, emotionally charged controversy, the reversal is practically instantaneous. I did not stay awake to watch the numbers climb. I went to sleep in the quiet Airbnb. When I woke up the following morning, the landscape had entirely shifted. The video had accumulated 5 million views in 12 hours. The comment sections across Kinsley's social media platforms had transformed into a relentless, unified wave of fury. The very audience she had weaponized against me just 24 hours prior had completely turned on her. They were not just angry. They felt fundamentally violated. They had donated their hard-earned money to save a dying child, only to discover they had financed a fraudulent supplement company and an $18,000 watch. The financial backlash was swift and merciless. By 10 in the morning, 3 major lifestyle brands that sponsored Kinsley's channel issued synchronized public statements. They announced the immediate termination of their partnerships with Bellevue Wellness, citing severe violations of their ethical conduct clauses. They legally distanced themselves from the fallout. By noon, the charitable crowdfunding platform officially locked Kinsley's account. They initiated a massive systemic refund process for the GoFundMe campaign, automatically returning the misappropriated funds to the original thousands of donors. Kinsley's LLC was instantly drained of its stolen capital. Gregory was not spared. He worked as a senior regional director for a high-end corporate logistics firm. His position relied heavily on trust, ethical management, and an unblemished public reputation. When millions of people saw the unedited clip of him dropping his daughter's belongings into a cardboard box in a hospital recovery ward, his corporate standing vaporized. Sarah monitored his professional network. His company just released a statement, she noted, reading from her tablet. They have placed Gregory on immediate, indefinite administrative leave, pending a full internal investigation into his conduct and potential involvement in financial fraud. He had lost his authority. Kinsley's subscriber count was dropping by tens of thousands every hour. The digital counter was in a freefall. The millions of loyal followers who had sustained their lavish Bellevue lifestyle were unsubscribing, reporting her channel for commercial fraud and demanding legal accountability. My phone, which had been flooded with death threats the previous night, was now receiving thousands of apologies. Strangers were sending long, emotional paragraphs begging for forgiveness for believing the live stream. I did not read them. I did not need their apologies. Their validation was completely irrelevant to the mission. I watched the empire crumble from the absolute quiet of the rental apartment. I felt no joy. I felt no sorrow. I simply felt the mechanical satisfaction of a successfully executed audit. The truth had corrected the ledger. Kinsley was watching her kingdom burn. She was entirely out of options. When a narcissist loses control of the public narrative, they inevitably retreat to their final line of defense: intimidation. They assume that aggressive authority will force their victim to submit. They believe fear is a universal language. On the 3rd day after the video went viral, an email arrived in my inbox. It was not from Kinsley. It was from a highly expensive, deeply aggressive crisis management legal firm located in downtown Seattle. The subject line was written in severe capitalized letters: notice of cease and desist and intent to sue. Sarah leaned over my shoulder as I opened the attached PDF. It was a masterpiece of legal posturing. The document formally accused me of malicious defamation, corporate sabotage, and digital extortion. It demanded that I immediately remove my video, issue a public retraction, apologizing to Bellevue Wellness, and sign a strict non-disclosure agreement. If I failed to comply within 24 hours, the firm threatened to file a lawsuit seeking $1 million in commercial damages. They are trying to scare you, Sarah said, her jaw tight. They want to bury you in legal fees until you break. It is a classic slap suit, a strategic lawsuit against public participation. I looked at the glowing screen. For a normal person, the threat of $1 million lawsuit is utterly paralyzing. It is designed to induce panic. It relies on the victim believing that the wealthy aggressor holds all the systemic power. But I was not a normal person, and I was not operating on emotion. I was operating on documented facts. I did not panic. I did not scramble to hire my own expensive defense attorney. I did not type out a long defensive explanation defending my character. I simply clicked reply. I left the body of the email completely blank. I did not offer them a single word of justification. Instead, I attached 2 highly specific PDF files. The first attachment was the hospital's official notary log, complete with the security timestamps proving unequivocally that Gregory had committed medical forgery. The second attachment was a certified copy of the irrevocable trust from Walter and Associates, proving that Gregory had zero legal authority to sell the Monterey property and was actively attempting to commit probate fraud. I hit send. The silence that followed was heavy and profound. We waited in the quiet apartment listening to the rain tap against the glass. Exactly 42 minutes later, a new email arrived from the same senior partner at the crisis management firm. The aggressive, threatening tone had completely vanished. The response was exactly 2 sentences long. Please be advised that this firm is no longer representing Kinsley or Gregory in any capacity regarding this matter. All previous legal demands are hereby withdrawn. I closed my laptop. When an attorney realizes their client is actively handing them documented, undeniable proof of multiple felonies they run, they do not risk their own legal license to protect a sinking ship. The bluff had failed. The intimidation tactic was broken. Kinsley had played her final card, and it was entirely worthless. The game was officially over. The collapse of a digital empire is a profoundly modern spectacle. It does not happen with a physical explosion. It happens with a series of quiet, algorithmic deletions. 1 week after my video was published, the primary video sharing platform took decisive unilateral action. They did not simply issue a strike or a temporary suspension against Kinsley's channel. They determined that utilizing a child's major organ transplant to manufacture a fraudulent health narrative violated their strictest commercial safety and exploitation policies. When you attempted to navigate to Kinsley's page, the millions of subscribers, the endless vlogs, and the curated thumbnails were gone. In their place was a single, stark, gray banner. This account has been terminated for violating community guidelines regarding deceptive commercial practices. The Bellevue Wellness brand was dead. The LLC was bankrupt, drained by the massive refund protocols initiated by the crowdfunding site. Kinsley had spent years cultivating an audience of millions, trading her own son's privacy for digital validation. Now she was staring at a blank screen. She was completely, utterly irrelevant. The offline consequences were equally absolute. Gregory's administrative leave quickly transitioned into a permanent termination. The corporate logistics firm publicly severed all ties with him to preserve their own reputation. But losing his prestigious career was only the beginning of his accountability. The certified copy of the irrevocable trust that I had sent to his former legal team did not stay private. Walter, the family attorney, formally submitted the documents to the county probate court, flagging the fraudulent power of attorney Gregory had filed. The authorities opened an official investigation into attempted real estate fraud. The financial strain of the canceled sponsorships, the refunded charity money, and the mounting legal defense fees for the probate investigation crushed them. The sprawling, sterile mansion in Bellevue was no longer a sustainable asset. It was heavily mortgaged, relying on Kinsley's ad revenue to keep the lights on. Sarah sent me a link to a real estate website a few weeks later. The Bellevue house was listed for a rapid short sale. They had to pack their belongings. I wondered briefly if Gregory used cardboard boxes to empty his massive closet. I wondered if he labeled them with a thick black marker. I did not dwell on the thought. I had completely excised them from my existence. I did not block their numbers. I simply deleted their contact profiles. If they called, the screen remained blank. If they texted, the messages were buried in an unsaved folder. I had cut the toxic root. I had severed the bloodline connection that had suffocated me for 26 years. I packed my own bags in the quiet Airbnb. My physical recovery was progressing perfectly. The incision had healed into a clean, precise scar. I picked up the small paper cup containing the resilient green cactus. It was time to leave Seattle. It was time to reclaim the only legacy that actually belonged to me. I was going to Monterey. 8 months later, the relentless gray drizzle of Seattle was nothing more than a distant memory. I stood on the back deck of the wooden cabin in Monterey, California. The air smelled of sharp, salt-aged cedar and blooming coastal jasmine. I closed my eyes and listened to the steady, rhythmic crash of the Pacific Ocean hitting the jagged rocks directly below my property. The sound was immense, powerful, and entirely unscripted. It was the sound of absolute, undeniable freedom. The transition from the sterile hospital room to this sanctuary had been highly methodical. With the irrevocable trust fully validated and authenticated by the county probate court, Gregory had zero legal avenues to challenge my ownership. The property deed was officially secured under my legal name, permanently shielding my mother's legacy from their chaotic financial ruin. I spent the first 2 months personally restoring the cabin. I did not hire contractors to do the intricate work. I sanded the old oak floors myself. I painted the exterior trim. I reclaimed the physical space with my own 2 hands, actively erasing the decade of neglect Gregory had allowed to settle over the property. But reclaiming a physical house was only the baseline of the recovery protocol. When you successfully survive a deeply exploitative environment, you eventually realize that your survival is not merely a solitary event. It becomes a systemic responsibility. The digital audit I conducted to dismantle Kinsley's empire opened my eyes to a much broader, much darker societal issue. Kinsley was not an isolated anomaly. The internet is heavily populated with parents who aggressively monetize their children's privacy, their chronic illnesses, and their most vulnerable moments for ad revenue and brand sponsorships. I did not return to my corporate archiving position in Seattle. Instead, I utilized a significant portion of my savings and my specialized technical background to establish a digital privacy advocacy group. We now provide pro bono legal and technical assistance to minors who have been victims of sharenting exploitation. We help teenagers scrub their unauthorized digital footprints from highly indexed commercial platforms. We file the necessary legal injunctions to formally separate their financial identities from their parents' corporate business accounts. We draft irrevocable trusts for the earnings these children unknowingly generate, ensuring the capital is strictly locked away until their 18th birthdays. We utilize the exact same metadata analysis audit trails and legal processes I used against Kinsley to dismantle other predatory family vloggers. I intentionally turned the specialized skills I originally developed in the shadows into a permanent legal shield for the most vulnerable targets on the internet. I poured a cup of black coffee and leaned against the wooden railing. The bright sun was beginning to break through the early morning coastal fog. My physical health was entirely restored. My liver had successfully regenerated, functioning perfectly without the toxic, chronic stress of the family I had permanently left behind. My mind was sharp, focused, and completely silent. There were no artificial ring lights operating in this house. There were no brand deals to negotiate. There were no manufactured emotional crises to frantically manage. I took a sip of the warm coffee. The victory was not just about destroying their fraudulent empire. It was about building my own reality on a foundation of absolute verifiable truth. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon in late October when the heavy brass bell beside the front door finally rang. I was sitting at the kitchen island, meticulously reviewing a newly drafted privacy injunction for a teenage client, when the sharp sound broke the quiet hum of the ocean breeze. I did not rush. I methodically saved the legal document, closed the laptop screen, and walked slowly down the short wooden hallway to the entryway. I turned the heavy iron deadbolt and pulled the oak door open. Macario stood on the wooden porch. He looked completely different from the frail, heavily powdered boy who used to sit under Kinsley's intense artificial studio lights. He was wearing a simple, unbranded gray hooded sweatshirt and faded denim jeans. The dark circles under his eyes, previously enhanced by Kinsley's makeup brushes to garner digital sympathy, were entirely gone. His skin had genuine, healthy color. He looked grounded. He looked entirely real. He had a single, heavily scuffed canvas suitcase resting on the floorboards beside his sneakers. He had turned 18 exactly 48 hours ago. Legally, he was a fully recognized adult. He was no longer a minor, legally bound to the custody of a disgraced online influencer and a terminated corporate director. He was no longer a commercial prop. He did not speak immediately. He just looked at me quietly, taking in the peaceful surroundings, the natural sunlight, and the profound absence of camera tripods. I looked down at the small canvas suitcase. "You packed incredibly light," I noted calmly. Macario offered a small, hesitant smile. It was the first genuine, unforced smile I had seen on his face in over a decade. It was not prompted by a director behind a lens. It was not manufactured for an engaging video thumbnail image. "I left everything they bought with the channel revenue," he replied, his voice remarkably steady. "I only brought the basic clothes I purchased myself from my part-time job at the local bookstore. I do not want to own anything that was paid for with a lie." I nodded, fully understanding the profound psychological weight of that decision. To walk away from the manufactured illusion of Bellevue meant walking away from the luxury, the comfort, and the financial safety net. It meant actively choosing to start over with absolutely nothing but the verified truth. It was the exact same definitive choice I had made while lying in the hospital recovery ward. "You are welcome to stay here as long as you require," I told him, stepping back and pulling the door open wider. "There are absolutely no cameras operating in this house. There are no sponsored dinners to attend. There is only a spare bedroom overlooking the water and whatever quiet time you need to figure out who you actually are." Macario picked up the heavy canvas suitcase. He stepped over the threshold, leaving the last toxic remnants of the Bellevue Empire on the porch behind him. He walked directly into the kitchen and set the bag down on the floor. He looked at me, his shoulders finally dropping the extreme defensive tension they had carried for 16 years. "Thank you, Camila, for everything." I did not offer a dramatic, tearful hug. I simply pulled a clean ceramic mug from the cabinet and poured him a cup of coffee. "Welcome home, Macario." There is a very specific type of grief that inevitably arrives when you realize your family views you strictly as a financial transaction. It is a quiet, deeply isolating mourning process. You grieve for the parents you fundamentally deserved but never actually possessed. You grieve for the childhood you spent desperately performing for an audience of two, hoping that one day you would finally earn a genuine, unconditional round of applause. But you cannot earn genuine love from people who only calculate leverage. If you take anything away from my documented experience, I want you to completely internalize this fundamental truth. The silence that a manipulator demands from you is not a demonstration of your loyalty. It is their currency. It is the only valuable currency they possess to maintain their fragile, fabricated empires. They rely heavily on your internalized guilt, your manufactured shame, and your desperate hope for future validation to keep their secrets permanently buried in the dark. You are completely allowed to stop spending your silence on them. You are allowed to declare emotional bankruptcy on a relationship that only exists to drain your personal resources. They will repeatedly tell you that family is everything. They will aggressively weaponize the concept of shared blood to keep you securely anchored to their abuse. But blood only dictates biology. It does not dictate morality. Real family is built on mutual respect, absolute honesty, and psychological safety. Real family does not hand you a cardboard box and tell you not to return. I do not hate Gregory or Kinsley anymore. Hate requires active energy, and I completely refuse to allocate another ounce of my cognitive energy to their deficit. They are simply erased files. They are highly corrupted, archived data from a previous timeline that I no longer need to access. Legacy is not what you inherit from people who happen to share your genetic code. Legacy is what you fiercely protect. It is the non-negotiable boundaries you draw. It is the objective truth you meticulously document. It is the quiet, unbreakable peace you intentionally build for yourself after the chaotic noise has finally faded. I walked over to the small, sunlit window in the kitchen. Sitting precisely on the wooden sill was the cheap paper cup from Harborview Medical Center. The tiny, resilient cactus I had planted inside it months ago had grown significantly. The sharp green spines were thick and healthy, and resting right at the apex of the plant, blooming defiantly against the white walls of the cabin, was a massive, vibrant pink flower. It had successfully bloomed in the exact container that was originally meant to signify my absolute disposability. I picked up a small glass and carefully watered the dry soil. My name is Camila. I was the invisible archivist. I was the disposable donor. But my reality is absolutely no longer for sale. If you have a Kinsley or a Gregory in your life, you are allowed to stop spending your silence on them. You do not have to scream. You only have to meticulously document the truth. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Send it to the outcast, the black sheep, or the scapegoat who falsely believes they are permanently trapped in the frame of someone else's lies. The audit is fully complete. The truth is permanent. Thank you for listening.